Now that we're all awake and red-pilled, I'd like to share some thoughts on how we can better ensure that we all stay awake once we leave here. To be clear, I'd like to offer some tips on arming ourselves against the trolls and the con men in this industry who would lull us back to sleep. After Jeff Deist, the president of the Mises Institute, suggested that we live in a post-persuasion America, I found myself just as interested in how people came to believe what they do as in what they actually believe. As a result, I found myself strangely more tolerant of those with whom I disagree, but increasingly intolerant of their sloppy or absent methods of discerning what they believe. While we can only infrequently know someone's thought processes leading to their beliefs and actions, we can certainly examine our own thought processes. As the leaders of the truth and transparency movement in this industry, I believe we are obliged to perform this mental exercise in order to preserve and further our efforts. I believe I'll make myself most clear by revealing my method of discernment and hopefully inspire many of you to suggest improvements or additions. How could anyone have the audacity to claim they knew what was actually true, particularly in this day and age? This is not academic, as our perceived knowledge and beliefs are the precursors to our rational actions. A process of elimination seems to have worked best for me, one which eliminates or discounts certain information as false or at least suspect, leaving a smaller body of information to sift through for the truth. First and most importantly, I reject the statements of known liars. Now, this does not mean that a known liar isn't for once in their life saying something true, but it's a good place to start. While there are those who say things that are not true, it is important to distinguish the misinformed from those whose intent it is to deliberately deceive. To quote Hans Hoppe from Economy, Society, and History, his latest book, it would be mistaken to assume that there exists a universal desire to learn and to correct one's error. Quite to the contrary, it will have to be assumed that some people, instead of learning and promoting the truth, actually have a constant motive to lie. That is, to maintain and promote falsehoods, even if they themselves recognize them as such. While he's talking about the destructive state, this insight applies equally to the too numerous to count con men in this medical industry. The future claims of one who has previously been simply wrong should not forever be discounted or dismissed. The future claims and statements of those who have been exposed as agenda-driven, deliberate deceivers can be dismissed, in my opinion, as trash. There are countless stories of brokers and consultants, for instance, who did not grasp how at odds their own personal fortunes were with the best interests of their client. Many of them have spoken here whose epiphany was their own self-dose of the red pill, and they could no longer continue their path. I think David Contorno's story is one of the most compelling examples. On the other hand, Jay and I both know of a consultant firm whose boss, a conspicuous pillar in the community, has weekly meetings shaking down vendors for bribes paid to him and his firm for continued access to his unsuspecting client victims. I've seen more than one case of what can only be called PTSD exhibited by former members of this firm, the dissonance in whose conscience made continued employment there impossible. All statements and claims made by this man and his company and those like him should be dismissed in our search for what is true. I immediately suspect statements from anyone associated with or paid by government. This does not mean those in government are necessarily lying, mendacious, and malicious, but historically, most are malicious and politically ambitious and can only survive the election ritual by lying or at least concealing much of what they actually think. Once again, there are rare exceptions, which I acknowledge, but I found this is a good place to begin culling information we're constantly bombarded with. Again, while some in government are well-intentioned, the state's track record of unintended consequences is clear. To quote Hans Hoppe again, markets deliver goods and governments deliver bads. My point is that even if the rare, well-intentioned claim oozes out of government, it is likely misinformed, if not overtly evil. Remember that the socialist half of our industry is the spawn of the state, while the state served as midwife to the other cartelized half. The next group whose claims I believe should be dismissed are those with an obvious conflict of interest. Recusal is common in the legal world, but shockingly absent in our industry. In our cartelized industry, it is not uncommon for an individual to represent both parties on either side of a contract, or when claiming to represent the interests of one while openly accepting payment from another whose interests are diametrically opposed to the former. Brokers and consultants hired by self-funded clients but paid enormous amounts by the carriers and vendors they recommend to their ostensible client victim are the most obvious example. I'm aware of a big-name accounting firm that has an in-house healthcare division that advises their clients. The firm has never disclosed that their largest clients are the price-gouging hospital systems with which their self-funded clients must contend in order to remain solvent. The accounting firm risks the loss of their big hospital clients if their healthcare division advises any action that is not in the financial interest of their hospital clients. Another example of conflict of interest, a crisis of conscience consumed a consultant in my office a few years ago. He had overheard me ask someone else at a large meeting why the large national brokerage firm he worked for never recommended a client buy directly from me. It turns out his brokerage was the largest provider of property and casualty insurance to the hospital systems in the United States. And for his brokerage to recommend anything to their self-funded clients that channeled less revenue to their hospital clients jeopardized the firm's property and casualty business interests. The opposite of conflict of interest is someone who speaks contrary to their obvious interests. I do listen to those whose statements are risky to their careers. People who are not passionate tend not to do this. They can certainly be misinformed, but they have weighed the risks of speaking out and typically have done their homework prior to doing so. Books, the writing of which jailed their authors, have intrigued me for many years, and the truths and insights therein are as eye-opening as anything I've found. Václav Havel's Power of the Powerless and Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, which he actually wrote from jail, are two examples. Our friend Marty McCary has begun chronicling the exclusion and career destruction of those who have questioned the popular narrative in the medical industry these days, individuals whose claims were later vindicated. Marty has endured a character assassination from other physicians, himself, for simply asking questions. How many academics and scientists have knowingly jeopardized their access to federal grants with claims and conclusions made as a result of their research? I tend to listen very closely to those who risk everything by speaking. I personally wore a tinfoil hat on my head for posting prices 12 years ago, and now we're finding those who don't post prices. Jay Kempton has armed me with a question that has saved me many missteps in the industry, and one I'd recommend you keep handy. How are you paid? If what someone does and what they are paid for their service is not obvious to the buyer, there is something wrong, as the buyer cannot discern value for the funds spent. It is also revealing to ask, who pays you? These questions have crossed the eyes of many with whom I've met who wanted to hide their fees from the buyer, jumbled into the completely transparent prices on our website. Just charge 20% more through this contract, and they're still getting a great deal. When I responded to that I'm happy to send an invoice that shows my website fee and a separate 20% line item for their charge, I get, oh, no, we can't do that. In the early days after launching the website, I mistakenly agreed to this arrangement once and found myself confronted by a savvy patient who wanted to know why they were paying 20% more than what was listed on my website. I told the vendor I would never do this again. I never have. So who else needs the red pill? Buyers? Certainly. There are many self-funded buyers in Oklahoma City, some of the largest names, publicly traded companies you know, who don't buy from me. Sellers? Absolutely. However, many of the hospital folks, as I mentioned earlier, are already awake and have acknowledged the inevitability of the end of their vicious ways. Facilitators? Yes, certainly. But no one understands the siphoning of revenue better than those in the middle, and however aware they are, they will be the last to pull the rope in our direction. So now that we are all red-pilled, rejoice, proclaim the truth, and remember that no one likes a cynic. Let's all keep smiles on our face and assume our role in the world as free market gospel super spreaders. Remember that to challenge the status quo, to deny the popular narrative, is to risk being labeled a denier. You might even be lumped in with deniers of all sorts. And in response, I suggest you simply declare yourself, as I have, to be a liar denier. So to sum up, we're obliged to remove the husk of lies that encases this industry and proudly and transparently state what we believe is true. Discern, then deliver the message. Remember, our message is among the most positive messages out there. Cheaper, better, more accessible medical services. Only the liars and the misinformed will challenge us. As my wife said earlier this week, the FMMA members are woke in a good way. Let's all monitor our own truth filters, stay woke, red pill the willing, and unapologetically continue to promote the market delivery of medical services. Thank you. Thank you.